Welcome back. We're closing out our semester, so there are three things we need to do. First, we need to wrap up our evaluation of different theories of the nature of minds. That'll be the topic of this lesson. The other two things we need to do are take a step back and reflect on the kind of inquiry we've been engaging with, and take a look ahead at where we might go next. Those will be the topics of the next video. First, then, how do things look for different theories of the nature of minds? Let's go back to our scorecard of theories. We last tallied up our thoughts in week 10, when we were focusing on functionalism. Since then, we examined teleofunctionalism, and then we switched our attention to the topics of attention and free will. How does free will fit into our scorecard? Well, you could imagine adding a column for free will, and then asking how the different theories satisfy the desiderata of explaining how free will is possible. But for better or for worse, that column won't be very enlightening. Historically speaking, defenders and critics of human free will have held all the views about minds that we've discussed, except perhaps eliminativism. There are dualists, behaviorists, functionalists, and identity theorists who are all compatibilists. And there are hard determinists in each of those camps as well. So adding a column about free will doesn't help us sort out our choices. Of course, just because they say they hold those views doesn't mean that every combination works out. For example, despite what they say, it's hard to see how dualists can explain the exercise of free will if they don't have an account of mental causation in general. But if that's our worry, then the free will column will just be redundant of the mental causation column. So again, it doesn't tell us anything we didn't already know. Where we left things off with free will was that, despite concerns from both hard determinists and neurodeterminists, the problem of free will seems best treated as a problem about what kinds of cognitive capacities we have, rather than about what kinds of basic stuff the world is made of. If that's right, then the problem of free will is orthogonal to the mind-body problem, rather than part of it, so it doesn't figure as a distinct desiderata on theories about minds. What about teleological functionalism or teleofunctionalism? I presented that view as just one particular way of working out the functionalist theories, especially for those who think that the primary psychological phenomenon that needs explaining is rationality. If we can explain rationality in terms of responsiveness to mental content, and we can explain mental content in terms of function, then explaining content-carrying functions in the teleological way will look very attractive. Viewed in this way, teleofunctionalism is a particularly interesting special case of functionalism. But teleological functionalism also tries to address another problem for functionalists. Remember, the big difference between functionalism and the identity theory, according to the scorecard, is that functionalism is adequately general and the mind-brain identity theory is not. And remember, the reason that functionalism is supposed to be more general is that it claims to be able to accommodate the so-called multiple realization of the mental. It claims to be able to explain how it is that things with brains quite different from our own, or with no brains at all, can still have mental or psychological states. But how do we figure out the right functions without abstracting away from ourselves so much that we end up counting everything as having mental states? Cars, thermostats, staplers, and water pipes. How do we specify mental processes in a way that is concrete enough that they are plausible causes and effects, but also abstract enough that they capture other creatures, but also not so abstract that it's just a matter of how we describe them? The teleological functionalist proposes to answer that challenge by classifying mental processes in the same way that we classify other biological organs and processes. This puts cognition on par with circulation, respiration, and digestion. If mental states are at least as real, causal, general, and explanatory as hearts and lungs, then that's plenty good to satisfy most theorists. As it happens, my own view is that teleological functionalism can't quite rescue functionalism all on its own. According to me, there's an equivocation in saying that the teleofunctional kinds are both causally efficacious and adequately general. But that's not an argument we can discuss right now. So Where does that leave us? Nothing in philosophy is entirely uncontroversial, but the scorecard as we've filled it out here is not too contentious. If we take it at face value, then we'd expect functionalism to be the leading family of theories. And it is. To the extent that we want to question this assessment, the inquiry will be directed right where we've been focused, namely on how the identity theory and functionalism can balance the competing demands of causal power and generality. If we want to know more about the merits of the theories, where do we look? Well, we could just keep making up imaginary cases, of course, and I have to admit there's quite a lot of that in philosophy of mind. But why do that when there are plenty of actual cases around? It's plausible that the best way to learn about actual minds and actual brains is to see what the sciences of minds and brains have to say. But it's also important to note that even if that seems like common sense to you, that fact is a fairly recent turn of events. Experimental psychology is just a bit over 100 years old, and scientific neuroscience is still in diapers. But if the sciences of the mind are relevant to questions about the nature of minds, and how could they not be, then we need to look at the kinds of explanations, theories, and models that those sciences produce. We can inquire about whether some of them better fit some of the theories of the nature of minds than others. That is, we're going to need to focus our attention on that last column of the scorecard and answer some questions about explanation in the mind sciences. If that's right, then there's not going to be a nice clear line between the philosophy of mind and those sciences. Our philosophical inquiry is going to be in conversation with and overlapping with scientific inquiry about minds and brains, and with social, ethical, and political inquiry for that matter. It's going to be a big interdisciplinary project, and it's going to take a long time to sort out. But don't you think that's what we always should have expected for something as complicated and fascinating as our minds?